Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. I'm going to do a couple of live streams tonight. Had a busy, good day at work, productive, and had a good workout, part this morning, partly this evening. So I feel a little energized. It's been about, 2 weeks or so since my last group of live streams. So I wanted to talk about something I feel very, very passionate about. Yeah, that's what don't I feel passionate about, especially when it comes to things like politics and history and the state of our nation. Now, there is this group, forum really, on Facebook called Capitalism versus Socialism Uncensored. And there, the majority opinion seems to be rather abhorrent from my point of view. Either you have a bunch of unreconstructed, abhorrent tankies, meaning hardline Marxist Leninists, who are, I basically have declared a state of war against them ideologically because they are enemies of our country. Marxist Leninists, National Socialists, neo fascist types, you know, they believe in an omnipotent and often unaccountable, highly authoritarian, if not totalitarian, command of all sectors of civil society. We understand, or I understand, why people join these movements. They adhere to these ideologies because National Socialism, fascism, third positionism, communism, Islamism, they can be and often are, particularly in the developed Western world and parts of Asia, are the results or byproducts of decaying political and economic liberalism, classical political and economic liberalism, a form of liberalism that doesn't address really the greater societal problems from too weak of a government or a poorly regulated or unregulated form of corporate capitalism. But what really pisses me off equally are what I call your sort of Lord of the Flies, quote unquote, conservatives. These are the people that kiss the proverbial behinds, that are very overly sycophantic and forgiving towards employers and wealthy people, and they completely dump or crap on workers, calling them lazy, and workers that want better wages and better benefits, no matter how hard they work. They're viewed as lazy parasites. You should be all grateful, forever grateful to the employers, the so-called job creators that the Tea Party and the Republicans talked about from roughly 2010 until 2012. Those types, they really tick me off. Um, and there are certain individuals on this group, like Enoch Wilson. He's a self described entrepreneur. He likes to seem on his Facebook page, flash all of his wealth, and he's a bit of a braggart about his wealth and where he goes, and he has these fine wines and liquors and cigars and suits and rented this fancy cars and everything. He's like, look at me, I'm a Mr. Capitalist and I made all this money, and fuck you to the workers, and yeah, we'll give you a pizza party and this and that, and because I'm able to afford it, and blah 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 blah. He comes across as a real stereotypical reactionary capitalist, if you will, really like how the communists and Nazis will portray capitalists as a bunch of greedy motherfuckers. Enoch Wilson basically confirms this stereotype, which is very dangerous. Capitalism, look, all the economic systems that have been tried are all flawed or bad in some degrees or another, including capitalism. But capitalism is the best system out of all of the flawed and screwed up economic systems. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be controlled and incentivized to produce the desired results and whatnot, but the system of private enterprise and relatively regulated free markets is the best way to go. So Enoch Wilson wrote on one posting on Capitalism versus Socialism Uncensored. if my employees ever tried to unionize, I would shut the company down and fire all the hostile employees. Then I'll reopen the company under the new name with a new tax number and rehire all the friendly employees. And of course, the question that begs is that why would they want to develop a union? Shouldn't you address their concerns or recognize your workers, your employees as a valuable part of the production process? I mean, without workers, Mr. Enoch Wilson, you ain't worth shit. You won't produce, you won't have your wealth because you have no workers. And if you don't have workers that are motivated and well compensated, number one, they probably can't afford your product or your service and the products and services of other businesses. And B, they're not going to produce for you. Workers and employees are necessary for the creation of wealth. It's not just the so-called job creators, the capitalists, the employers they're not the sole or only ones responsible for wealth generation. And instead of trying to meet the workers' grievances, they might be legitimate. He's like, fuck you, you're pieces of shit, and I'll fire all of you. Even the ones that are friendly, you're still going to get fired because he said he's going to rehire them. Firing the friendly employees, instead of firing the ones that are discontented, just firing them, he's going to fire the friendly employees. So he's saying that you laborers aren't worth shit. And let me tell you, down here in Florida, the Republican Party and Tea Party, down in Palm Beach County, for example, where I used to live, it is full of these individuals that think like this. I was screening the documentary by Dr. Peter Navarro, who later served in the Trump administration, and Greg Autry, both not leftists by any means. They had showed a documentary called Death by China, or they produced it. Great video, by the way. I encourage you to purchase it. I'm sure it's available on Amazon.com and elsewhere. However, the reality is that this gentleman who served in the city of Tequesta government, his name is Thomas Paterno, and he refused to give his name, but he did sign in the online sign-in sheet for this event, which was sponsored by the Coalition for a Prosperous America, which is a anti-free trade organization. They're reforming our bad free trade policies. And he came in and blaming all the unions, and the average workers need to take sacrifices, and you all gotta hustle and work 3 jobs and And I'm thinking, number one, it wasn't, and he was claiming, I'm from Pennsylvania and the steel mills were killed by the unions. And I said to him, and I was disgusted by him, and there were a lot of your other Tea Party types that were there, because one of the organizations that we outreach to was the Palm Beach County Tea Party, which is totally affiliated with the Koch brother network. And the Kochs are globalist libertarian billionaires. They were totally affiliated with Americans for Prosperity, which is a Koch organization, essentially. And Tom Paterno was going on his point of view. And I said, look, I respect your opinion. I wanted to wring his neck, and because, I don't like people that lack empathy and shit all over powerless people. I don't like it. Okay, I don't like people like that. I don't respect them politically. I consider themselves responsible for pushing many young people towards the left, which I don't think is a good thing. So Paterno was saying, all these things, and I'm like, look, you had the most pro-right to work, anti-union, but enlightened industrialists like the textile industries in the South joining hands with organized labor to fight against massive dumping in the 1980s in the Labor Industry Coalition for International Trade, for example. Unions bonded together with industry by the 1980s to protect the factories and try and modernize the factories. The Reagan administration really didn't do enough to protect American industry. They were free trade globalists and everything else. And when he's saying that people should hustle and work 2 or 3 jobs and sacrifice, why? Why people work hard enough in one job? What about work-life balance? What about family values that all these Tea Partiers and so-called religious conservatives claim to love in the Republican Party, their Christian values and for the nuclear family? How are you supposed to work 3 jobs, even as a husband, and yet be around your family for your children's baseball games or whatnot? Or is now, according to the so-called Christian right and the Tea Party and the Reagan Republicans, now is having children now a right that should solely be reserved for the wealthy people and the upper middle class? I don't think so. To me, that's anti-American. It's just as anti-American as those tanky communists that cheerlead for the enemies of the United States. So Enoch Wilson, fuck you. Fuck you for pushing people to the left and legitimizing the tanky communists and other anti-capitalists on the capitalism versus socialism uncentered. Enoch Wilson, you give a horrible, horrible representation for capitalism. And that is unforgivable. Because capitalism, when managed properly, like before Ronald Reagan, St. Reagan, actually worked pretty well in the United States. Now we have another dude here on the same Facebook page. His name is Robert Leonard. He's another beauty. So there was a post which talked about how, guys, participants, what do you think? Do you think investors are important, or workers are important, or the employers? Who do you think is more important? Or do you think workers are more important than the investors and the employees? Well, to me, either way, that question is loaded in class warfare in a way, because workers and capitalists and investors and government, they're all necessary for the functioning of an economy. An economy without capitalists and innovators and investors can't exist. And a free economy without any sort of government oversight is going to be nothing but completely anarchic. And the greed, extreme greed that is not regulated by the firm hand of the state at times, is going to eat itself up. Remember, Karl Marx wrote correctly, I might add, in the Communist Manifesto that the bourgeoisie contains, as a class, contains its own gravediggers. I mean, there was a New York Times article about an investor by the last name of Polk, and he talked about how he, along with his other hedge fund investors and executives, well, they were just gigantic fireballs of greed, to quote them exactly. And I think his name is Sam Polk, Polk. And without any proper checks and balances against these fireballs of greed, you're going to have a capitalist economy that's going to implode on its own. It's going to eat itself up. So, of course, make a long story short, I know I tend to get a little wordy here. I wrote, we need all the above. We need innovators. We need investors. We need property owners. We need capitalists. We need workers. We need the communities. We need the consumers. And we need a government. And labor should be rewarded, not crapped all over, as many of the advocates of the free market seem to advocate on this page. So, of course, Robert Leonard wrote, totally not answering really my point adequately, I might add. He's another Tea Party Republican type, Reagan, let's shit on the poor type of dude. He wrote, did anyone force you to take a job? Well, asshole, you need a job in order to live and get paid, as it should be, because you shouldn't be sitting on your ass if you're perfectly able-bodied and not work. I'm sorry. That's where I agree with Captain Smith in the Jamestown colony. He who doesn't work shouldn't eat. And if you're able-bodied and able to work, you should work. And I might alienate some of my left populists maybe on this show. I don't know when I say that. So that's a bullshit question. Did anyone force you to take a job, idiot? Did you not first agree to specific levels of compensation prior to beginning? Yes. Well, of course. See, that point that Robert Leonard makes is a bullshit point because the employer has more power than you as an individual. Numbnuts. Then, if you're unhappy with what you make, either acquire the skills and work ethic to be more worth to employers, start your own business, or quit throwing childish temper tantrums. Well, I'm not throwing a childish temper tantrum at all. So he's assuming that this is a temper tantrum, and I'm not. B, acquiring the skills. Well, that's what Reagan and Clinton administrations and all their commentators were saying. Oh, you're losing all those industrial jobs from outsourcing and offshoring and globalism and open borders. Well, hey, just learn new computers, go to college. I remember this clearly. Y'all going to college and everything, and that's where you have the student debt and whatnot starting to increase because those quote good paying industrial jobs that sustain communities were in many cases were disappearing. But yet those high skilled jobs were subjected to being outsourced cheap labor. It's called the H-1B visa programs and L-1 visa programs. So much acquiring for skills and work ethic. Well, many of the people that work at these jobs where they're earning low wages or multiple jobs are working hard. They have very hard work ethics. So, Robert Leonard, fuck you for making that comment. Fuck you, and fuck you. Because that's an insulting our working men and women. There are lazy people, but let me tell you, as an aggregate whole in the United States, laziness is not a problem in the United States. It's people not having the proper work-life balance. You can work one job, work your ass off, and you can have a life. Okay? And if you want to call this a temper tantrum, then so be it. And work ethic to be worth more to employers. Employers are looking for the cheapest labor possible. They're looking to pay the least for the most output. Now, there are many enlightened employers out there. We're going to be talking about one tonight in a separate live stream. And I've talked about it, like Mr. Aaron Feuerstein of Malden Mills, the former CEO, Aaron Feuerstein. We talked about him as a tough employer, but he took care of his employees. But you got to work your ass off for them. You got to have that balance. Now, Robert Leonard just believes in total capitalist exploitation. Robert Leonard believes in the Gilded Age plutocracy. So he's garbage, in my opinion. I kind of want to be like Major Richard Ojeda. He's a working class Democratic populist, and I kind of like his style. And sometimes you just got to let loose. I'm tired of being academic and polite towards such individuals. Start your own business. Yeah, I think people should be entrepreneurialism should be encouraged. But the problem is with declining wages and declining savings, it's not easy to save this kind of money to start a business and necessarily get a loan either, too, as well. I mean, over 40% of people can't afford $1,000 emergency, and about it was about 60% of people can't afford $1,000 emergency, and like 40% of Americans can't afford even a $400 emergency. Well, guess what? I'm not one of those people. I can't afford those emergencies. I've been fortunate. I have saved some money. I have expenses. I had investments that were given to me as a child, and most of it I have not chosen to spend it, and that's fine. But I had some privileges. Other people don't have privileges that I do, and there are people with much, much more privilege than I do. So, but the bottom line is also you have to have a certain brain wiring to start your own business. Starting your own business is not just for everyone, and it's not sustainable. If everybody was a business person, then you would have no workers. You need employees. Not everybody can be a businessman. And many occasions, many of these startup entrepreneurs, they fail. Not that I'm judging them negatively, but it's a reality. So it's just Robert Leonard is just giving class warfare from the alleged right. That's what Robert Leonard is. He represents class prejudice, class warfare from the anti-social right, quote unquote right. And he just writes other bullshit, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, I write an emoji rolling my eyes. It's people like you that drive our youth to embrace socialism and communism, nothing but callous social Darwinist, lack of empathy, assholery. Your point is completely devoid of reality and is so out of touch that you earned my hatred and contempt. And he said, there is no empathy to be had for those too lazy to improve themselves and their value, who then cry and moan about how unfair it is they aren't being paid more for not doing anything to earn more. Well, he offers no proof. It's just total prejudice. Again, does he actually think every single person working multiple jobs or one or two jobs or working as working poor people are just trash who are lazy? No. They're just not paid enough because the rich can get away with not paying them enough. That's the bottom line, because it doesn't fatten the wallets or the accounts of the majority shareholders. That's how capitalism in this country, corporate capitalism, works. I took my first breath in a 4-room shack with no indoor plumbing. I now pay more in taxes than the average family grosses in a year. Well, that makes it even worse, because he forgot his roots. He forgot his roots. Now, because he does well, and God bless him, but maybe he had help from the government. Maybe back in the day he got student loans, subsidized loans, college Pell Grants or whatnot. I bet you Robert Leonard probably got some benefit from being in a union or subsidized education or something. Because the bottom line is it's a combination of hard work on an individual level combined with the help of a community, whether it's a family, a teacher, a school, the government, something. Nobody can totally do something on their own. They have to have help in general, and that's okay. And there is something to be said about individual effort. It's critical in any developed economy and advanced society. You have to have individual achievement and effort. It needs to be upheld. I now pay more in taxes than the average family grosses in a year. Well, he's an out of touch asshole, is what that comment comes across as. Very simple. Because I got off my ass and made something of myself. Until you do the same, don't come around whining about empathy. I mean, he's assuming this about me. He doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't know that I'm a professional library manager. He doesn't know that I have investments, that much of it has not been squandered. He doesn't know this. If you aren't being paid what you think you are worth, either you have grossly overestimated yourself, or you and you alone are to blame for not putting in the work necessary to be worth more. And really and truly, what this guy is all about is this callous social Darwinism. He goes on in another post in the same group. Those who spout on and on about labor theft are, in my experience, also the laziest, most worthless employees in the organization. They are the last in the door and the first out, always in Dutch overtime and attendance. And the only thing they produce is in abundance is excuses, which makes them perfect for believing in Marxism, socialism. No, Robert Leonard, it's people like you who shits on hardworking American workers that push people away from believing in any form of capitalism and into believing in socialism or communism. And let's explore Robert Leonard, shithead. Let's explore the research on why people become socialism. I know this is going to be a long session here on this live stream, but let's do a little reading here. I'm going to go through my book because I discussed this at length in my book. And I've been noticing I got like 600 views, then it got knocked down to about 595, and then crept back up, and now I'm at 601. Thank you all, the subscribers, for subscribing to my channel and enjoying it. But I know I'm going to lose viewers because the anti-communists are thinking, oh, I sound like a leftist. But the reality is that I want to reform the system in order to preserve it. And we need to do political and economic restructuring in order to achieve the goals of the social unity of the people and to combat the left. Now, let's read some reasons why people become leftists and communists. And just forgive me. So, okay. Robert H. Duggar, and there are concerns amongst the capitalists, correctly, elements of the super wealthy capitalists about a social revolution of the left because of the increasing extreme, unsustainable, abnormal economic inequality that's occurring in the United States. There was a secret report from Citibank. It admitted that the U.S. devolved into what it termed a plutonomy, where, quote, economic growth is powered by and largely consumed by the wealthy few. This situation has the potential for sparking a violent anti-capitalist counter-response. I'm reading from my book, Turning the Page. In a section titled, What Could Go Wrong?, the authors of the secret report argued that beyond war, inflation, the end of the technology productivity wave, and financial collapse, we think the most potent and short-term threat would be societies demanding a more equitable share of wealth. Antonio Garcia Martinez, a former Facebook product manager, noted, I think people who are particularly attuned to the levers by which society actually works understand that we are skating on really thin cultural ice right now. Robert H. Duggar, a financial industry lobbyist and a partner in the global hedge fund firm Tudor Investment Corporation, warned, anyone who's in this community knows people are worried that America is heading towards something like the Russian Revolution. As the veteran populist civic nationalist radio broadcaster and commentator Chuck Carter, whose show I've appeared on before he passed away, he warned the economic elites better listen to what Chuck Carter is saying, because if I fail, they get David Duke, who's a neo-Nazi and not a friend of capitalism. Investor Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, stated, there is a rising tide of anti-capitalism and we should be concerned about that. Bridgewater Associates founder Ray Dalio urged a radical reform of the existing corporate capitalist system in an effort to save it from collapse or falling prey to political extremists. He urged that such burgeoning income and wealth inequality should be declared a national emergency. Dalio stated in an interview with 60 Minutes, if you look at history, if you have two groups of people with very different economic conditions and you have an economic downturn, you get conflict. If you look at the 1930s, you had four countries that were democracies that chose not to be democracies to bring order to the conflict. Disney heiress Abigail Disney excoriated corporate executives for their, quote, addiction to money and the, quote, extreme unfairness of paying their workers paltry, unlivable wages. She noted before the House Financial Services Committee, quote, we have begun to cannibalize the very people that make this economy thrive. After all, no middle class, no Disney. It is time to pull back the curtain on this garish life and ask ourselves how high a handful should soar as the rest of us watch the American dream collapse for a large majority of the working people. Let's see, any comments? Well, I got one like. There were a couple of people that were listening. This is a very important broadcast. You need to listen to this. In my opinion, at least. Tom Metzger of the neo-Nazi White Aryan Resistance predicted, quote, as the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and the massive influx of people from other nations, mostly non-white, and the exporting of more and more jobs from this country, the chemistry is there. It's like a bomb waiting for someone to light the fuse. And for people like Tom Metzger and White Aryan Resistance to take advantage of that. Christian Piccolini, who was the leader of the Chicago area skinheads until 1996, claimed that he adhered to National Socialism because he was, quote, lost and lonely. He claimed on NPR that he believed that people become, quote, radicalized or extremists because they're searching for three very fundamental human needs: identity, community, and a sense of purpose. If underneath that fundamental search is something that's broken, I call them potholes. Is there abuse or trauma or mental illness or addiction? In my case, many years ago, it was abandonment. I felt abandoned, and that led me to this community. But what happens is because there are so many marginalized young people, so many disenfranchised young people today with not a lot to believe in, with not a lot of hope, they tend to search for very simple black and white answers. And, he goes on and on about warning that because of the internet, we now have this propaganda machine that is flooding the internet with conspiracy theory propaganda from the far right. I don't view National Socialism and neo-Nazism as far right. It's not right or left. It's National Socialism. It combines quote unquote right-wing themes of nationalism and law and order with that, and quote strong nuclear families with some variant of socialism, which is a strong welfare state, and also is a very strict regulation of the private economy, and often with a state or party-controlled sector as well. Disinformation, I'm just reading the rest of his quote again. And when a young person who feels disenchanted or disaffected goes online where most of them live, they're able to find that identity online. They're able to find that community, and they're able to find that purpose that's being fed to them by savvy recruiters who understand how to target vulnerable young people. And they go for this solution because, frankly, it promises paradise, and it requires very little work except for dedicating your life to that purpose. And of course, I say if the federal government, reinforced by popular culture, implemented a program of radical civic nationalism which addressed the issues and pain experienced by the needy or alienated sectors of the population, then their drift into the neo-Nazi movement could have been minimized. And this is where people like Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson, they're just for shitting on these people and throwing them away because they're just a bunch of fucking losers and pieces of shit who are lazy. That's what Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson think of you. So they're going to provoke their assholery economics and politics of being assholes. Their Ayn Rand ideology is simply going to just push people away. That's all they're going to be doing. And they're going to be pushing people to the extreme left or towards National Socialism as the class chasms continue to sharpen in the United States. I'm going to get something to drink. I'll be right back. Because we're going to be speaking a lot tonight. All right, I'm back. I got a nice glass of Sauvignon Blanc from Napa Valley. Enjoyed it last night with a nice sushi dinner with my girlfriend. So now we're gonna have this the rest of it, just this glass here of Sauvignon Blanc. I enjoyed with sushi with my girlfriend. I'm gonna have this glass tonight on tonight's live streams. Okay. Ooh, that feels good. All right. Let's see if there are any comments here. Any comments? No comments, but one like. All righty. And then I go on and I talk about it with the rise of Donald Trump. You have the increase in the communist movement in the United States. According to the national chair of the Communist Party USA, almost 1,000 people were recruited to the party after the election of Donald Trump in November 2016. Joe Sims, who coordinates the CPUSA social media and party work, reported in the past few years close to 5,000 people have joined the CPUSA, over 600 in the last 2 months of 2016. That's 5,000 too many people. We don't want people joining the communist movement. And this was already in March of 2017, as reported on the Communist Party's website. The Trotskyite Socialist Alternative grew by 30% since the election of Donald Trump. Democratic Socialists of America, which is a Marxist group, not a social democratic group, with increasing ML or Marxist-Leninist tendencies, also grew by leaps and bounds. And they exceeded their membership exceeded nationally 45,000 members. From a group of 40 members, the Workers' World Party offshoot, the Party for Liberation and Socialism, the PSL, expanded its presence to 90 cities. Gloria La Riva, who ran on the PSL ticket for president, garnered over 74,000 votes. La Riva has plausibly stated that the, quote, fog of anti-communism is lifting from the, quote, negativity and misunderstanding of the past, quote, unquote, acceptance. Well, there are two reasons for that. Number one, the Soviet Union launched under Gorbachev a propaganda campaign to, quote, eliminate the image of the enemy. And when the Soviet Union and the Communist Party Soviet Union repositioned himself in the Yeltsin administration and privatized its wealth, they dropped the mention of communism and socialism from their ideology, but still they maintained control over the basic structures in the Russian Federation, the military, the intelligence services, and the economy, hiding under the label of a partially privatized economy. And so again, Soviet Union, they knew they could achieve more and destroy American anti-communist resistance by not appearing as an enemy anymore. Yuri Arbatov, long-term Soviet propagandist and ideologist and expert on American politics, he turned at eliminating the image of the enemy. And he has mentioned this numerous times in the late 1980s. And Soviet officials and propagandists mentioned it in 1992 as well. And I documented in my book, Turning the Page, and also my book on the perestroika deception, too. And I mentioned even in my book, this was a result in part of a younger generation growing up in a post-Cold War era and being told that Ronald Reagan defeated the USSR. Furthermore, the promise versus the reality of neoliberal free market economics antagonized our younger compatriots under the sway of socialist ideologies. Meanwhile, the labor-hating globalism and trickle-down economics drove people, even doubters, have second thoughts towards communism. Joe Sims of the CPUSA reflected, and this is particularly galling. Sims of the CPUSA reflected, thoughts that I had made a bad choice after the fall of the Berlin Wall were tempered by the recurring economic downturns, the unrelenting attacks on labor, the heartless shredding of the social safety net, and to top it off, the wholesale robbery inflicted on blacks, Latinos, and senior citizens during the bank subprime ripoff. Nothing like Wall Street barons stealing billions to revive your revolutionary vigor. That I made the right choice was recently reinforced once again by General Motors' closing of its Lordstown assembly plant, under Trump, I might add. Yet another blow to the Youngstown area's finest workers. Want to produce more communists? Keep it coming, GM. So there is the ideology and economics of Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson screwing over average Americans. You had Joe Sims, who's a high-level communist to this day in the CPUSA, and he was even saying he had second thoughts after the Berlin Wall collapsed in November of 1989. And then, of course, the behavior and the greed and the callousness, the Robert Leonards and the Enoch Wilsons, changed his mind, said, you know what, maybe communism isn't such a bad thing after all. I mean, even though it killed millions of people worldwide, four corners of the world, plotted aggressions, communists all over the world, and continue to plot aggression against the United States and wants to impose slavery, never mind. It's like, because they're the Robert Leonards and the Enoch Wilsons, you're just fucking us over. And what I mean by that is the mentality of the Enoch Wilsons and the Robert Leonards. That's what I'm talking about. So if we had an economy based not on the callous assholery of the Robert Wilsons and the Enoch Wilsons, people will think like them. The communist, maybe Joe Sims would have denounced communism and said, fuck you, Gorbachev, and fuck you, Deng Xiaoping, at the time. Shooting millions of people and Berlin Wall falling and this and that. Poverty under communism, totalitarian control. Screw you. But no, Enoch Wilson, Robert Leonards of the world, they had their way, destroying the American economy, destroying American lives because they hate poor people, because they're callous, they're horrible, abhorrent people. They just believe in untrammeled greed. And there you go. It attracts people back to communism. And I know this is a message that a lot of the conservatives and even a lot of, I'm sure some of the followers of J.R. Nyquist, who graciously has come on this program and interviewed, and I know I get a lot of his followers and they like my views on geopolitics. But when it comes to economics, I think you guys have a lot. I could be wrong, and you can feel free to comment. I think many of them have a hard time, probably will have a hard time accepting these views, that there is a system failure, that the people like Robert Leonards and Enoch Wilsons antagonize people into the clutches of the left and even neo-fascism. And in this respect, I don't want to say I'm anti-capitalist, but if it comes to the modern Reagan and post-Reagan era economy, and if you want to call that capitalism, yeah, then I am virulently against that form of capitalism. Danny Haifong, who wrote for the Workers' World Party newspaper Workers' World, and he's affiliated with the Democratic Socialists of America, he is a self-proclaimed Marxist-Leninist, and he absolutely loves communist China. Danny Haifong would collaborate with China if they marched their troops into the United States. That's my opinion. I mean, the guy is, you look him up, he is totally in league with the People's Republic of China. Staunch China apologist, in the pocket of Beijing. But when you read why Haifong became a communist, it's again the same theme. Trickle-down economics and how it negatively affected his family. In an interview, Haifong recalled, I grew up in a working-class community in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My father was a white union worker for the federal government, and my mother was a Vietnamese woman who has constantly struggled with mental health issues and has struggled with employment. So in other words, Enoch Wilson and Robert Leonard would view those, his mom and dad, as garbage and shit, basically. I read on. After the elimination of Glass-Steagall, banks and creditors sold my mother the dream of owning land and great wealth. Her pursuit of these endeavors nearly left our family bankrupt and her massive credit card debt upwards of $250,000 by the 2008 economic crisis, forced my mother to work 60 to 70 hours per week for several years to make up the difference. Oh, well, I thought all these poor people and people that, get snookered by unscrupulous financial corporations now working 60 to 70 hours, but yet these people, I thought, according to Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson, are lazy pieces of shit. I go on. Haifong writes, even then he was forced to refinance the house that we lived in twice in order to pay a small portion of the tuition that my sister and I incurred from undergraduate school. It was in college that I was exposed to the 1%. Unlike many of my black, brown, and white peers, I was able to attend an elite college and graduate. During this time, I frolicked in the same institution as our class enemy in the 1%. Of course, class enemy, he's a communist. It drove me into depression. I thought about dropping out more than once. There you go. What if Glass-Steagall wasn't repealed? What if we had a much better mental health care system and network for people, like a Medicare for all system, as an ending point where you have the private providers, meaning private medical practices, combined with national insurance, where these mental health issues wouldn't be costly, where you would get hopefully decent mental health care for the mom. And if Glass-Steagall stayed in place, maybe Haiphong wouldn't have been a communist, wouldn't have become a communist traitor of the heart, because Haiphong is a traitor of the heart. But he was pushed in that direction. And I say to the anti-communists and the Nyquist supporters, we're great people. You gotta understand, you gotta look at these things, and you gotta take stock and say to yourself, the system is malfunctioning. The weaknesses in untrammeled political and economic classical liberalism are being exploited by unrestricted greed of corporate capitalism, and it is exploited by the left and neo-Nazis to their benefit. And as things get worse, these extremist groups will grow. People adhering to extremist ideologies will grow. Let's say the kids and the participants in the 1%. I've written in Turning the Page how many in the so-called 1%, they are not attached to the country. They say that openly. Journalist Matt Taibbi refers to them as the archipelago man, like Mitt Romney, meaning they live in their own world. They're disconnected from any sense of loyalty to the nation or its people. What if we had an education program, like, for example, a national service program, which blended the rich kids, the poor kids, and the middle class kids of all races together to serve together? This way, they will look at each other as fellow human beings, as fellow Americans, rather than just being walled off from each other and afraid of each other. How about that? Maybe Haiphong wouldn't have been turned off by people with a lot of money, or the kids who come from families with a lot of money, by their arrogant attitudes, is what he's implying, at least. I go on. This is going to be a long live stream because I believe passionately in this. It pisses me off. The CPUSA in Houston grew to 250 members by February 2020. In fact, in conservative Houston, Texas, CPUSA candidates garnered 250,000 to 100,000 votes. Only 19% of millennials agreed with the statement that a military takeover is not legitimate in a democracy. 1/4 of millennials agreed that choosing leaders through free elections is unimportant. I don't blame them, because what are we getting? We're going from Trump to Biden and McConnell and Manchin, and people that don't represent average Americans and what they want policy-wise. According to a Harvard University poll, a majority of Gen Xers, that's my generation, are critical of free markets. Can you blame them with the crony deregulation since the last years of President Carter? Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democratic senator of Massachusetts, who actually is an opponent of China and Russia, she's not a communist. She actually was seen applauding when Donald Trump said America will not be a socialist country. She was up there applauding, and I agree with her on that. And the Communist Party USA was pissed about that. She concluded that after, quote, decades of domestic policies that have helped the rich get richer and left everyone else behind, it was no small wonder that, quote, more Americans have less faith in democratic government today than at any other time in modern U.S. history. Now, average, increasingly younger Americans were pushed into radical socialism, even Marxism, because of the callous neoliberal policies of deregulation, union busting, and outsourcing. Appeals made by the establishment that better jobs were around the corner if more citizens attended college turned out to be a largely hollow promise. Michaela Damon, The vice chairwoman of the main chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, noted, "A lot of us were told to go to college, get a degree, and so many of us then got into horrible debt, and now they can't get a job in their field. The whole American dream promise they were sold has kind of died." Mounting college debt radicalized people like Ian Gunther, who accumulated $40,000 and $50,000 for an electrical engineering degree. Well, I thought all these conservatives, even ones that claim they're populist, were saying, well, you shouldn't go to college because you're just getting basket weaving degrees. Well, no, most of these people going to college are getting legitimate freaking degrees for legitimate careers. So shut up with your basket weaving, conservatives, because most of these people are trying to get degrees because industrial jobs were shutting down. Okay, retail wasn't paying good anymore and whatnot. Okay, so they're told to get an education, just like Robert Leonard was saying, get an education. Well, Ronald Reagan cut quite a bit of federal funding of college education. The college used to be low cost tuitions. In some states, even free charge, tuition free. So that's the real reason. Well, that's the reality. This is people like Enoch Wilson and Robert Leonard are assholes, so they don't understand that because they're anti-American. They spit on many of their fellow Americans. And in this program, this will not be tolerated. This is why I'm declaring a state of war, of warfare through speech against such ingrates that are pushing our young people and our Gen Xers, people my age, towards the extreme left and National Socialism, God knows what other god-awful ideologies. And that is unforgivable. I read on. As a result, Gunther joined the DSA. As Sarah Hauer of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, no bastion of progressivism, it's a conservative newspaper, reported that many factors were at play in shaping our younger generation's positive view of socialism and negativity towards capitalism. Hauer claimed that, quote, millennials grew up at a time of economic uncertainty. As children, they saw parents lose jobs and struggle to afford health care. As young adults, they may be saddled with debt and unable to see beyond their one-bedroom apartment and a modest job with minimal benefits. When their parents entered the job market, corporate America was the provider of healthcare, pensions, continuing education, and short stability. Now the costs of healthcare, education, housing, and retirement are weighing heavier on our young people. See, Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson and all those reactionary, antisocial, unpatriotic, America-hating employers that claim they love America, those people love instability. They hate a form of capitalism that is for stability. J. Michael Collins, faculty director of the Center for Financial Security at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, stated, quote, if you're a millennial, you come of age during this boom and bust. You saw firsthand that it's harder to get a job, pay raises, buy a house. It's just harder to be economically independent when you can't change jobs or get the kind of income like previous generations could. Mike McCarthy, an assistant professor at Marquette University who researches American capitalism and economic sociology, stated, quote, capitalism was given full reign and it kind of failed in a way. Derek Beyer, an Air Force veteran who completed 2 tours each in Afghanistan and Iraq, became radicalized because of the do-nothing approach from the Obama administration and poor decision-making from the military leadership. When Beyer attended the People's Summit in Chicago, he met with DSA members, and the substance of their arguments made sense to him. After Trump became president, Beyer formed a DSA chapter in Milwaukee, which soon had 250 members. Me at his 250 too many members. All because of people like Enoch Wilson and that Robert Leonard, scumbags. Their ideas, the ideas that they represent, are pushing these people to authoritarian, extreme political organizations. It is their fault. Mary Steffenhagen joined DSA because she became tired of being told to just be patient and let compromise work itself out while Massive economic inequalities ensued. She was originally raised in a Christian conservative family. Stephen Hagen became a radical socialist when she realized that it was difficult for her to attain the American dream. Quote, get a degree, a salary job with good benefits, and own a home in a good neighborhood. Olivia Ketby became frustrated by Obama, arguing that he served the wealthy elites. She then became a member of the DSA. Spencer Potts, who started a chapter of the Young Democratic Socialists at the college he attended, first became radicalized when his father was laid off from his unionized truck driver's job. According to Potts, things were tight and the family had to subsist from his mother's position as a hairdresser. This emotionally impacted Potts' father. His father then became hopeful about Obama, but then became disillusioned over the administration's bailout of Wall Street. Philadelphia DSA co-chair Scott Jenkins recalled that his family was, quote, decisively proletarianized during the Great Recession of 2008. Natalie Mediri, an elected member of the DSA's political committee, whose mother was laid off from the recession, graduated from college in 2013 without any clear job prospects like most people at that time. Melissa Naschek, the co-chair of the Philadelphia DSA, suddenly everything is just harder, keeping track of my money, constantly stressing about whether I can pay my bills. According to Midri, the majority of DSA members in Philadelphia have graduated in the last 10 or 15 years or so and are just really, really struggling. Potts expressed his skepticism of the Democrats when he stated they have to represent their donors' interests, and their donors are the same people who laid off my father. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I'm going on and on. I'm going to keep on going here. It's a labor of love for my country, for our country. Dustin Guastella, who is a writer for Jacobin and a DSA member, grew up in a conservative family where he absorbed their ideas, which blame unions and high taxes for everything wrong in America. He was won over by his Marxist professor, especially the idea that workers are in a position of constant war with their employers. Guastella argued, I actually think it's much easier to win working-class conservatives over to socialism than to win liberals over. Guastella also pointed out that millennials do not have the same fears of socialism and communism since they did not grow up during the height of the Cold War. They don't remember all of this propaganda about the Soviet Union communism, how evil it was, even though Russia is secretly communist in many ways. Secretly, and they're openly supporting all kinds of anti-American and communist causes throughout the world. Because what? Gorbachev and Arbatov, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Politburo, launched a campaign to eliminate the image of the enemy. And then, of course, the neoliberal Tea Party, Reagan, globalist, reactionary labor haters, they were winning control of the United States and increasing class contradictions in the United States. So what could possibly go wrong? Russia, China building up their forces ready to invade the United States on the one hand, the fifth column growing in the United States to the extreme left and anti-American forces, and then you have the class warriors of the right like the Enoch Wilsons and the Robert Leonards and others. They're just shitting all over the poor people and saying, hey, you're just a bunch of lazy motherfuckers and you deserve what you're getting and you should live in a freaking hut and I'm going to spit and shit on you because you're worthless. So what could possibly go wrong? Here you come, social explosion. Okay? And that ain't a good thing. I want my 16-year-old daughter to inherit a strong America. And as I see things going, America is heading into the proverbial dung heap of history. As Joe Sims of the CPUSA reflected, it was big business's maximum profit imperative, in a word, capitalism, has precipitated the collapse of basic industry all across the country. It's NAFTA, not socialism, that has held down wages and kicked U.S. workers in the gut. The diminution of anti-communism, along with worsening economic conditions because of unrestrained corporate capitalism, provided fertile ground for younger generations to absorb radical doctrines. In the war of ideas, the forces of the far left and neo-Nazism are not incorrect in their critiques of capitalism and corrupted so-called democracy. Where they are wrong is their solutions and violent tendencies. It is up to radical civic nationalists, that's my ideology, to step to the fore in the U.S. and peacefully take power in a revolution which rejects both collectivist totalitarianism and uncontrolled capitalism. Oh my God. Whew. Okay. All right. Let's see how much you can read more. I mean, it's just unbelievable. All right. Let us see what we can read. Okay. All right. So, uh, I'm going to read more. Labor of love. Labor of love. Okay, so I wrote a section in my book, a postscript on COVID 19 and turning the page on COVID 19 and the death of George Floyd. And I think this is very important here. Since the Republican Party under Trump continued its slide toward a callous Tea Party Reaganite ideology, it should be no surprise that there has been an increased appeal of political radicalism amongst an increasing number of Americans. This represents a dangerous trend because, in the event of an uncontrollable economic collapse, the ruling corporate capitalists and their political lickspittles will revel in and justify the inequality as a natural development in society. They will oppose any revolutionary reforms to our dying political economic system as violations of freedom and the Constitution. Meanwhile, the petite bourgeoisie, independent, medium-sized, and large corporations dependent on the domestic market, workers, the poor, and professionals will be increasingly squeezed and pauperized. This will open the door to mass appeals by political extremists, who in turn will rightfully criticize the liberal capitalist system, plutocracy. Such radicals will then impose the other opposite of radical civic nationalism, total totalitarian collectivism. Remember, it can take a combination of social, political, economic chaos and dislocation and well organized political extremists to extinguish basic freedoms. Many Americans would say a large country like the US could never be taken over by a politically radical authoritarian party or movement. However, only 200,000 Bolsheviks took over the geographically large nation of Russia during a time of political, economic, and social chaos. Russia at that time had a population of 91 million people. As Lenin remarked, give us a handful of revolutionaries and we will overturn Russia. The governments, as the virtual appendage of plutocracy, gross mishandling of, and the severe economic dislocation from the COVID-19 pandemic, increased the appeal of extremist ideologies. This was revealed in an exchange on Facebook that I stumbled across. A corporate sycophant Republican named Mitch Milhouse posted the following message regarding the maldistribution of wealth on Facebook on March 5th, 2020. Billionaires need to pay their fair share? Bullshit. Most of them risk 20 plus years risking it all, toiling away with zero salary so that your life can be better. Jeff Bezos employs 800,000 people and pays over $10 billion a year in salaries so you can get 2-day delivery while you sit on your ass. Wow, talk about assumptions. I get deliveries from Amazon. I don't sit on my ass. I don't like sitting on my ass. I like being active. I mean, I'm 11:33. I'm, yes, literally sitting on my ass, but I'm being active. I'm using my brain. I'm talking to you all tonight after a tiring day of work and working out and running errands. And I like that lifestyle. I like being active. So anyways, getting back to this point here, this dumbass Mitch Milhouse. Be honest with yourself. You're lazy, unskilled, and lack necessary drive, motivations, education, problem-solving, work ethic, and creativity to succeed in the easiest time to succeed in human history. Capitalism didn't sell you a worthless 200K degree. The universities did. I will never sympathize with the victim, poor me mentality. You want more? Go look in the mirror. That's who's responsible. Get off your ass and get your lazy hands out of other people's pockets. What a motherfucker, Mitch Bitch House. Such a bitch for the globalist billionaires. Disgusting. Disgusting human being. So, I know I'm going to lose subscribers for this because I'm going nuclear. This is what a declaration of war is, and I'm declaring war against these people. This program will declare war against the fifth column elements of the left and National Socialists and neo-fascists on the one hand that want to enslave us, but also the globalist billionaire plutocrats and multimillionaires, the elements that are against the country's interests and all their little sycophants. They're all their degenerate sycophants, such as Mitch Milhouse and Enoch Wilson and Robert Leonard. Not surprisingly, such a callous, out-of-touch post was met with much understandable opprobrium. One person named Francesco wrote in response, "Congratulations, the guillotine just got 15% more rusty and you radicalized 400 more millennials and Gen Z who are all laughing at you." Another poster named Justin T. Hudson wrote, "I get where this guy is coming from and maybe how his mindset developed. And if people are complaining that they have nothing when they are easily capable of more than fair point. But ultimately, the lack of compassion and love in this message makes me sad and part of why the world is not a better place right now. Children born into poverty and hunger in the richest country in the world. When the system allows people to hold on to far more money and resources than they will ever need personally, when there are limitations on supply of both and fellow humans, children especially, are suffering on the most basic level, then that is a pretty sad state of affairs. Everyone who can should pay more and give more to the most vulnerable, many of whom are that way through no fault of their own, and really help them get on their feet with respect and dignity, not shaming. Does anyone think we're on this planet to be individuals to this extent and to allow ourselves not to care to this extent? In an article for The Forward, Joel Sawson predicted that the elite response to COVID-19 will, quote, radicalize my generation. It has to radicalize us. He wrote further, "I no longer feel confident I will ever find stable, permanent employment in my field, a field that may quite possibly collapse entirely in the wake of this pandemic. And I am increasingly wondering whether it is financially responsible for me to raise a family. Is it any wonder millennials are increasingly throwing up our hands and saying the entire system has failed us, asking why we should return to a normal life when normal life has never provided us with any hope for a sustainable future? Is it any wonder polls show young Americans increasingly preferring socialism over capitalism? At some point, we will come through this pandemic, but we won't return to normal. An entire generation is going to be radicalized by this experience of how gravely our government has failed us during this time. We're going to demand more government services, more health care, more paid sick leave, an entirely new social contract. We won't accept a return to normal, not when normal is what led us here in the first place." Predictions of the radicalization of younger Americans were borne out by the facts. An estimated 10,000 additional people joined Democratic Socialist America since March 2020. Since the pandemic, another 10,000 people joined one of the largest communist organizations, Democratic Socialist America, because they have become openly communist in many ways. Abby Harms, who was laid off from her job at a board game store in Denver, joined DSA because of outreach from that organization regarding food assistance, help for filing unemployment, involvement in rent strikes. What the fuck did the establishment Democrats and Republicans and Tea Partiers and alleged MAGA Trump people do for these people? What did they do? So you got DSA and other radical organizations, radical extremists, trying to find food for these people. Please. Makes me sick. Harms noted regarding her membership in DSA, "I felt like I was doing something productive out of this whole nightmare. I had a purpose and something to fight for." The co-chair of the Detroit DSA chapter reflected on his group's skyrocketing membership. People are really starting to just look around and say, man, capitalism isn't working. If the markets can't even produce hand sanitizer or toilet paper or masks during a plague, what good is this system? Julia Shannon, who sits on the steering committee for the Los Angeles DSA, which recruited 300 new members in April 2020, noted there's the sense that this situation is unacceptable and immoral, and that feeling is really pushing people into the meticulous work of organizing. We have to try to work towards harnessing that momentum and energy to create structures that work for the majority of people. The Denver chapter of DSA recruited 200 laid off service workers in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, meanwhile, corporate America and all these wealthy people were getting all this money hand over fist. In the Trump administration, people like Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin were saying, well, we're not going to reveal who got this money and the specifics and this and that. But yet Congress, like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, Mitch the bitch for corporations, corporate globalists in China, communist China, Mitch the bitch for China, McConnell, they were all haggling about, well, we can't give all these people all this money, and we, every month, we can't give monthly checks to average Americans. So it's like, fuck you, starve. There you go. Maurice Eisterman, a history professor at Hamilton College and a charter member of the DSA, stated that DSA's growth in the past few years was as impressive as anything that's happened in left-wing history. The DSA Denver Labor Chair Mariah Wood claimed that, quote, people are enthusiastically working with the DSA. It's a good time to be a socialist. Oh, God, it makes me sick. Membership in the Twin Cities DSA increased by 200 members. The group's co-chair, Rita Allen, said anyone who lives with a little precarity in their life could see that the overall response to the pandemic was completely insufficient. We seized on that moment. Well, looky-do. Of course, an extremist groups are going to seize on that moment because of inaction by our government, because we don't have a government of the people. David Meyer, a sociology professor at UC Irvine who specializes in social movements and public policy, claimed that the economic downturn and further hardening of plutocracy made DSA, quote, well positioned to capitalize on the societal upheaval happening now. And, and then there's just more on the communist traitors and these wicked Bolsheviks in the United States just taking advantage of everything and siding with China. To take the wind out of the sails, I'm reading more from my book. To take the wind out of the sails of the political extremists, our existing political and economic order needs to move away from the paralysis and corruption of untrammeled classical liberalism, meaning constitutionalism, and towards an authoritative state, which emphasizes both individual life rights and the duties of citizenship, especially the elites. I am going to get some water right now, so I will be back. Okay. Water in a wine glass. I know it's not proper etiquette, I'm sure. But nevertheless, you make do with what you have at the moment. Capitalist control over public policy needs to be vastly reduced and balanced with that of the welfare of the employees or workers. These alterations are not made to our form of government, then the appeal of political extremists will continue to increase. In April 1938, FDR noted in one of his fireside chats, democracy has disappeared in several other great nations, trying to impersonate him, not because the people of those nations disliked democracy, but because they had grown tired of unemployment and insecurity, of government confusion, government weakness. Finally, in desperation, they chose to sacrifice liberty in the hope of getting something to eat. We in America know that our own democratic institutions can be preserved and made to work. But in order to preserve them, we need to act together problems in the nation boldly and to prove that the practical operation of democratic government is equal to the task of protecting the security of the people. History proves that dictatorships do not grow out of strong and successful governments, but out of weak and helpless ones. We are a rich nation. We can afford to pay for security and prosperity without having to sacrifice our liberties into the bargain. But now things, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, are government owned by corporate capitalists are resistant to reforms. Joe Biden said he wouldn't sign any Medicare for all bills when it came across his desk from the Congress. He only gave us a $1,400 check, and that was like Trump, not to all Americans. Average Americans being nickel and dimed, while the plutocrats continue to get enriched and sell out the country's national security and sense of social solidarity. Hence, contemporary political discourse needs to move away from Tea Party arguments for impotent government and communist neo-Nazi positions advocating total government. Instead, our ideal governmental system will weave the best traditions inherent in liberal individualism and communitarianism into an activist centralized state. We balance ideology with pragmatism. Martin Luther King noted that today our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. Multimillionaire businessman and advocate for a more balanced capitalist economy, Nick Hanauer, posted on Facebook October 9th, 2020, here's the truth. This whole debate between socialism and capitalism, it's bullshit. The real debate is about whether government works for you or for rich people and big corporations. That's it. And he's right. Our declining quality of life and standard of living radicalized select Americans into embracing collectivist authoritarian ideologies and solutions to our national problems. In an appeal to National Socialist colleagues, a group of ex-neo-Nazis, Frank Mink, Matt Heimbach, and Jeff Schupp wrote. Jeff Schupp was the head of the National Socialist Movement. Matt Heimbach was one of the founder of the now defunct Traditionalist Workers' Party, or TWP. They wrote in an open letter, it is important to convey that fundamentally we agree with you that there are issues, legitimate grievances that drove your participation in the movement, the National Socialist Movement. The opioid epidemic ravaging working class communities, the economic impact of globalization, the impact of mass migration, a political class that doesn't care if members of your community live or die, and a national foreign policy hijacked by a war on terror that has steered resources overseas and away from domestic concern and development. All of these things are real and impacting the lives of millions of people every single day. In a video, Matt Heimbach elaborated as to why he embraced a very radical form of National Socialism. I understand what brought me into the movement was really seeing economic, social, and political alienation and abandonment of my community. In other words, the very policies that Enoch Wilson and Robert Leonard support. In a video, Matt Heimbach believed that effective de-radicalization starts from a process of listening and humanizing people and trying to address root problems and actually treat violence as a symptom, not something that just needs to be stamped out with a boot, but you have to address things like mental health care, economic stability, housing, people not feeling like they are being listened to in a political system that forces them, at least in their own mind, to lash out in violent ways. Oops, I got to plug in my device. I'm losing my battery. Don't want to do that. Making some important points here. That if you don't start out from a point of compassion and understanding and humanizing people, then all you're ever going to do is see more tragic incidents of violence, more people throwing their lives away, and the problem is going to get worse. The biggest way to neutralize radical neo-Nazi violence is to make the disenchanted, dispossessed, this is what I'm saying, feel truly empowered through dialogue and integrating their concerns into governmental policy. Heimbach also believed that neo-Nazi ideology could be stopped through addressing, quote, the inequalities that are within our system, the issues of globalization, the issues of a capitalist economy that are really driving people into the dirt, where they can't eat, where they can't be able to take care of their families, they can't keep a roof over their head. It leads to insecurity that we need to address these systematic problems. Issues like having proper education for people, which here in the United States, of which a lot of working class people don't have access to the types of education to get jobs to provide a basic standard of living for themselves. Heimbach summed it up by, quote, addressing the symptoms by addressing the causes. By addressing the root causes of violent extremism, then the symptoms will resolve themselves. And I say, of course, if efforts are not made to abandon the culture of atomism and capitalist oriented hedonism, laissez faire economic policies, and the devaluation of labor, then the forces of collectivist extremism will grow stronger and increase in their credibility in the eyes of the masses. At the end of the day, an unrestrained capitalist class motivated solely by greed will prove to be the undoing of the very system of free enterprise. As Marx reportedly predicted, the last capitalist we hang shall be the one who sold us the rope. As Jared Nyquist lamented, we are addicted to the shopping mall regime. Serious solutions are now beyond our psychological reach. We haven't the political will or intellectual integrity to cut through our long held delusion of supremacy. Something vital in us has rotted away. In order to fix the situation, we must first have a diagnosis, a deep sociological analysis, followed by public understanding of the problem. Indeed, it was the Tea Party Reaganite obsession with freedom, DUMB, as opposed to an ordered, balanced freedom, which served as a main catalyst for the decline of the U.S. This freedom was birthed and then harnessed to serve corporate America and its globalist anti-U.S. agenda. As Hockey, Haque, wrote, freedom, as opposed to freedom, is the, quote, absence of any kind of obligation or responsibility to anything greater than narrow, immediate, infantile self-satisfaction. That's the ideology of Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson. Feels so good shitting all over people like that. It's wonderful. This focus on hedonism and immediate gratification served the upper classes, thus preventing the nation from exerting positive collective action to strengthen our country. Decades ago, traditional conservatives, liberals, and businessmen comprehended the importance of a balance between a healthy community spirit and individualism. This in turn stabilized the capitalist free enterprise system and blunted the economic appeal of totalitarian extremism. Wurtzman wrote that in the post-World War II era, quote, many executives were concerned that unless they made sure there were enough jobs to be around, and unless the benefits that came with them were sufficiently abundant, communism or socialism might well take root on America's shores. Harrison Jones of Coca-Cola commented, any nation with a great unemployment wave becomes a seedbed for isms, meaning fascism or communism or Nazism. Conservative columnist and former Southern States Industrial Council and later USBIC leader Anthony Horrigan, one of my favorite conservative commentators, argued in 1984, if industrial workers feel dispossessed, some force will move in and harness their anger. The likelihood is that the anger will be at conservative forces in American society. Prompt action to prevent further deindustrialization in the United States will do more than preserve our national strength. It will prevent the emergence of resentment and radicalization that could cost our country dearly in the years ahead. In Staying on Top, the former architect of Nixon's Southern strategy, Kevin Phillips, wrote that Reagan's lack of an industrial policy would, quote, create an opening to the left by which anti-business forces can trade on the public's nationalism, economic frustration, and desire for action to enact more radical measures. Pat Buchanan wrote in 2015, for scores of millions, the American dream is gone, sacrificed to the gods of the global economy. A new world economic order created by and for an elite whose 1,700 corporate jets were parked to wingtip last week while they partied in Davos. That is why there may be a Syriza in all of our futures. Syriza is a pro-Russia, anti-American party that gained control in Greece at that time. Conservative writer and economist William R. Hawkins predicted while transnational corporations bulldoze societies and tear up national flags, the left waits in the wings to pick up the pieces. Hawkins also warned in 2016 if conservatives do not find a way to reestablish a reputation of capitalism as a positive force, harnessed to national strength and social advancement, then the socialist program of transformation will prevail. Former neoconservative commentator and author Michael Lind predicted the neo-fascist right is more than likely than the cosmopolitan left to benefit from erosion of living standards and free market by global erosion of living standards by free market globalism. Laissez-faire globalism may breed its own nemesis in the form of the most radical and destructive kinds of ethnic nationalism and economic statism. As far back as the 1800s, Karl Marx himself recognized that unrestrained capitalism contained the seeds of its self-destruction. Marx bluntly noted, what the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. I'm just trying to see if I can find some more here. In an article published on the CPUSA's website, Communist Party USA's website, April 2020, C.J. Starks wrote that he or she joined the party, quote, out of what I felt to be necessity more than anything. In an age filled with disease and looming economic depression, I felt I have no choice but to throw my support behind the one party committed to working class liberation. But the current ruling parties, power lies in the hands of the rich and the powerful, desperate to do whatever is necessary for monetary growth. This desperation manifests itself in the absolute disregard for elderly individuals during the start of the coronavirus outbreak. The consideration to put not just the elderly at risk, but also those vulnerable to the disease show me how morally bankrupt both capitalist parties are. They can't help it either. Capitalism finds itself unable to both care for its people and to make a profit. The measures that must be implemented would kill capitalism, thus there is no clear path forward with either the Republicans or the Democrats. Another article authored by the Ohio District of the CPUSA dated from April 2020 alleged that Americans were, quote, flocking to the Communist Party USA in the past few weeks due to the lack of public health care programs to protect people infected with COVID-19 and a lack of an adequate safety net where, quote, the working class is at the mercy of the crises that are inevitably spawned by capitalism and regular cycles. One day you're part of the family, as some companies like to pretend. The next day you're trying in vain to log on to your state's unemployment compensation website. Makes you think about capitalism. On the other side of the radical spectrum, Joshua Neuer, the chairman of the neo-fascist National Reformation Party, lamented, more recently I have observed an increasingly outright meanness, as in turning away the poor from hospitals and health care, physically beating on the homeless, scamming senior citizens, and price gouging during natural disasters. Add to the mix the Black Friday events after Thanksgiving, people trampling over each other and rushing to get the limited number of bargains stores have to offer to those first in line. The general atmosphere is tense and predatory as well. I was driving in the city when in two separate incidents, the driver leaned out the window shouting, "Get out of the way, old man!" As impoverishment mounts and we get more desperate with COVID-19 related problems, no health care, greater unemployment, and growing social anarchy, expect more predatory behavior. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on about this. President Kennedy warned in 1962 Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Commentator Gerald Celente noted, quote, when people have nothing to left to lose and they've lost everything, they lose it. This is why I am declaring a state of war against the Enoch Wilsons and the Robert Leonards and all those people that believe that poor people who are underpaid, working and middle class people who are underpaid, who are trying to make ends meet, or are trying to play by the rules, are just a bunch of lazy pieces of shit. That is unacceptable. I hate these such people. Because now we see, you have to understand, put myself in my shoes. I like to research why people join political extremist movements. And many of them are not lazy people. These are people who are understandably disillusioned by the system. And I think it's time that we need to reconsider our system that we currently are living under. It doesn't mean throw it away. You don't want to throw the baby you don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater. What we need to do is we need some new party to emerge. Radical civic nationalism is my preference. And take power in this country. And we need to have an authoritative state when it comes to the abuses of capitalism, when it comes to dealing with national security issues. We need to have a proactive government. I believe America has the capability of moving in this direction. There are people I talk to. They understand my ideas. Democrats, even some Republicans and independents. There needs to be changes in this country. On this channel, we're going to go to war against the totalitarian collectivists who want to enslave us all and put this horrific, unimaginably evil form of scientific totalitarian control that micromanages us, probably under a foreign occupation of Russia and China. But we also have to declare war against these Tea Party Reagan reactionaries like the Robert Leonards and the Enoch Wilsons that view our poorer sections of our national community as garbage. I will not tolerate that on this channel. I am declaring a state of war against the Enoch Wilsons and the Robert Leonards, the people who denigrate our hardworking Americans of all races and colors and religions and genders, male, female. They are poison. I have now spent over an hour reading sections of my book to prove to you that these attitudes of extreme Lord of the Flies, quote the William Golding novel, the social Darwinism, the class hatred from the employer side, as exhibited by Robert Leonard and Enoch Wilson, are the engines as to why our country is declining, why more and more Americans are becoming anti-capitalist adherents of anti-capitalist politically extremist ideologies. That is not a good thing for this country. I'm going to fight the Robert Leonards and the Enoch Wilsons on the alleged right, as well as the totalitarian extremists and apologists, whether they're the Medea Benjamins, or the Caleb Maupins, or various neo-Nazis that exist. I will fight them. But we also have to understand why these people join these movements. Ow. Whoops, I almost rolled out of my chair here. Sorry. We have to understand them. And we have to listen and understand and hear them out and hear their grievances and incorporate their grievances into government policies in order to ameliorate the conditions of their communities that they come from, whether it's the inner cities or parts of the Midwest or the Rust Belt or Appalachia or parts of the Deep South or wherever. That is not going to require a rugged individualism. It is going to require the community spirit of radical civic nationalism. And yes, we don't hate rich people because they're rich, because they have more possessions than we do. We hate the elements of the rich who sell out the country, who sell out our people, our working class, and our national security, and only thinking of themselves. We hate those elements of the rich that view themselves as, quote, what Matt Taibbi refers to them as archipelago men, because they use all the benefits of the country, but yet they spit on us when it comes to needing to sacrifice for the greater good of our people and the survival of our nation. So I conclude my declaration of war, intellectual war, against such individuals that I know I'm going to get a lot of crap for this YouTube video. But one thing always about is inform my politics is my love of this country and wanting to preserve it and wanting to make it a better place and wanting not the left to seize power and not for Russia and China to attack and occupy the United States. And one of my goals on this channel is to prevent a social revolution started by political extremists. And the only way to do that is not just by crushing them and saying struggling poor and working class Americans are lazy. The way to do it is through revolutionary reforms within a peaceful context in order to improve the capitalist system, the democratic system of politics and economics, but also to give people something to believe in, a creed to believe in. And that would be, in my opinion, radical civic nationalism. So again, I want to thank you for listening to this rather lengthy live stream. I'm pushing myself. I'm going to do a couple of more live streams and then I'm going to bed. And thank you again for listening. Feel free to comment. Thank you, whoever liked this video. Thank you so much for liking it. There were a couple of people listening to this video. I encourage, if you like my program, if you like the content of what I say, please share my programs with friends, with colleagues, with family members. We've got to get this message out. Thank you all. God bless and good night.